let's look at these then. So the drill for today, which you will be looking at first week back, so have a look at this video clip and over half term and check you've got these steps down for next time. Okay? I've got to rearrange for D. Well, D appears twice. That's the first problem. So at some point, I'm going to have to factorise to get D outside a bracket. That's what's in my mind. I know I'm not worried the fact that there's 2 because I know I can actually factorise probably at some point. So, what's the first thing to do in this? Suggestions? Times by D. Excellent idea. Gets rid of this D at the bottom underneath. So if I multiply both sides by D, I get y times D equals lambda x minus D. So that's an excellent good first step. You see how that's arrived at. Multiply both sides by D. If I multiply this side by D and this side by D, then those D's cancel, which leaves us this. Okay? So as long as I do the same thing to both sides, I'm not doing anything I shouldn't do, and I end up with that. And that's got rid of the fraction, so good. Next. Yeah, but before I can do that, what am I going to do about that bracket? Yeah, get rid of the bracket first. Multiply out the brackets next. yd equals, multiplying out the bracket means that everything inside the bracket, the x and the minus d, has got to be multiplied by what's outside the bracket, lambda in other words. So I get lambda times x minus lambda times d. Next. Okay, yeah, the key to the next step is, so once I've got, because I've got D's, remember I'm after D, they're on both sides, the key to getting D on its own is getting every term involving D on the same side. I could bring the yd over here, but that would make it negative, so that's not a good idea. So get rid of the negative lambda d on the right-hand side by adding lambda d to both sides. So if I add lambda d to both sides, I get yd plus lambda d equals lambda x. I've added lambda d to both sides. Added lambda d to here and added lambda d to here. That means these cancel at minus lambda d plus lambda d gone. So I end up with that. These little steps you need to start practicing, and there's loads of them in the textbook and the solutions are on the website, so it's just practice. Now we factorise on the left hand side. I know if I've got 2 D's, at some point I'm going to try and factorise. That means if we look at this, D is common to both of these terms, so I can take it outside a bracket. So I take D outside a bracket, leaving me y plus lambda inside the bracket. So I end up with that. Yeah. Well, the trouble with taking y from both sides is that y is now multiplied by d. So if I did that, I'd just have minus y on this side and minus y on that side. It wouldn't mean I could cancel that out because it's not y on its own, it's y times d. So that wouldn't help in this case. The key step here is to factorise, and then you can see I've only got d occurring once. Then, once I've done that, what can I do finally? Yeah, divide by that whole term. Divide by the bracket, y plus lambda. So I end up with d equals lambda x over y plus lambda. That was not easy. So note the steps, learn them. Okay? I've included that one because lots of the steps you have to do that are common, like multiplying both sides by something. Getting rid of the fraction is often a good first step, so well done there. And then once you've done that, multiplying out the bracket is often a good step. So we've done that here. Once you've done that, getting terms involving what we want on the same side is a common step. And then once you've done that, factorising. So there's lots of common steps within that one. Okay. Number 2. This one's a little bit more straightforward. We've got to rearrange this one for t, I think, haven't we? So, what might we do? If you look at the bracket, it's all multiplied by R0. So how do I get rid of the R0? To get rid of, because it's multiplied, to get rid of it, divide. Okay? Divide both sides by R0. R over R0 equals 1 plus alpha t. So that's a common first step. The fact that this bracket is here is telling me that the last thing that happened on this right-hand side was the whole lot, the bracket, was multiplied by R0. So get rid of that, divide by R0, and you're left with this. Because I've got rid of the R0, I no longer need the bracket, so I can just write it like that. Now, remember I'm after getting t on its own, so what am I going to do next? Yeah, the 1, actually it's a 1, that's correct, yeah, take that away. So subtract 1 from both sides. And then, lastly, divide by alpha, yeah. So showing how to do that, let's divide by alpha. How do I show that? Well, I could put the whole lot in a bracket, r over r0 minus 1, and then divide that by alpha, and show it like that. That's okay. Or, do you remember I was talking about divide x divided by 3? One of the first things we talked about is the same as a third of x. So instead of writing it as divide by alpha, I could write it as 1 over alpha times r over r0 minus 1 equals t, which might be a sort of slightly neater way of writing it rather than having two fractions over the top of each other. So lots of common steps in there as well. There's another way we could have done this. Instead of our first step being divide both sides by r0, and that's perfectly valid, that method, and that gives us the correct solution, I could have actually approached it a different way. I could have multiplied out the brackets, and that's another perfectly valid way of doing it. So if I multiply out the brackets first of all, I get r0 times 1 is r0 plus r0 alpha t. And in some ways this might be a slightly more straightforward way to do it. Now what am I going to do to get t on its own? Minus r0 from both sides. R minus r0 equals r0 alpha t. And then get rid of both those by dividing by. T is multiplied by alpha and r0, so to get rid of them, divide by alpha and r0. So r minus r0 all divided by r0 times alpha equals t. And that's another way to do the same thing. In some ways that looks better, doesn't it? So could have multiplied out the brackets and done it that way. Both correct. So number 3, get L on its own. It's in a square root. So at some point, you're going to have to square to get rid of that square root. So what I do to do this one is first of all divide both sides by 2 pi to get rid of the 2 pi on the right-hand side. So I get t divided by 2 pi equals the square root of L over G. And then, to get rid of the square root, square. square both sides. So I get all the left-hand side squared, so I write t over 2 pi, and then square it, equals L over G. And then finally multiply both sides by G to get rid of the G. So L equals G multiplied by T over 2 pi all squared. So that's actually quite a straightforward one, although it looks awkward at the start. Yeah. So let's look at the number 4. What we do to simplify this one is to expand brackets and then collect like terms. That's what this is all about. Expand and collect like terms to simplify something like this. So we expand out the bracket. X times 2x gives 2x squared. X times minus 4y gives minus 4xy. I always write them in alphabetical order, so yx or xy, but write it as xy. Watch this one. Minus 2x times 4x is minus 8x squared. And where you might go wrong, minus 2x times y minus 2xy. So that becomes a negative 2xy. Now, if you look at this, 2x squared minus 8x squared is minus 6x squared. Minus 4xy minus another 2xy is minus 6xy. So I can collect together like terms. I could simplify it further actually, because if I look at that I can factorise it. Minus 6 is common to both of these, and so is x. So I could take a minus 6 outside the bracket, and I could take an x outside the bracket. Factorise, and you will have to do this sort of thing in Unit 4, factorise. What am I left with inside the bracket now? What have I got to times minus 6x by to get minus 6x squared? No, minus 6, oh, the whole thing, yeah. But the first term, minus 6x times x would give me minus 6x squared, won't it? And look at the next one. The sign's important here. What have I got to times minus 6x by to get minus 6xy? Y. So in other words, it's just plus y, not minus y, plus y. And so that would be fully simplified as far, and yeah. Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah, both of those are correct. There is no right answer in these things, because it all depends on what you want to do with it next as to how you leave it. Okay. Right. Last one was number 4, number 5 rather. Area of a circle, pi r squared. Circumference of a circle, pi d, or 2 pi r. Recognise formally for the area and circumference of a circle that you need to remember.